Hey, welcome to the CMO Whisperer Show. I'm your host, Steve Olenski. Part marketing practitioner, part ad agency veteran, part journalist. I was a writer for Forbes for 10 years. I've had so many insightful conversations over the years with business leaders, to athletes, to celebrities, to, of course, CMOs. The only difference now is instead of sharing those insights through written form, I'm doing it this way. Welcome to a very special episode of the CMO Whisperer. It is 2-for-1 day at the CMO Whisperer Podcast because I have not one, but I have two guests for all of you. The first guest, and I pulled this at random, guys. I didn't do alphabetical order, so I'm not playing favorites. They're two guys, so we know how men can be. The first one is Kearon. John is the founder of System1 Group. He's an inventor of pioneering.
Am I first by surname?
You're first at random.
Of John or Joel. I mean, Joel should be first.
Do you see how this is going to go, everybody?
Yeah, I'm used to being second. My last name.
We haven't even started, not a minute in. So buckle up, everybody. It's going to be a bumpy ride. John is an inventor of pioneering behavioral science research methods that better predict advertising and innovation success, now adopted by hundreds of multinationals. John's recipe for success: imagination, creativity, courage, obsession, resilience, adaptability, self-belief, commitment, gratitude, ability to go without sleep, very important, and just a touch of madness. My other guest is Joel Weinberger, a professor of psychology and a practicing clinical psychologist. He also consults for political campaigns, nonprofits, and businesses alike. His work in all those areas focuses on unconscious processes. His book, The Unconscious, won the Book Prize Award of the American Board and Academy of Psychoanalysis. Gentlemen, welcome to the CMO Whisperer Show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. You're a legend.
You are very welcome. And again, buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be a hell of a ride. On this special episode, we're going to dive deep into two specific areas: advertising and emotion, and how the two go hand in hand because evoking feelings creates a deeper connection with audiences, making messages more memorable and impactful. It's going to be a really, really interesting conversation. And I want to start off with a very high level topic that we talked about off air. And that is, most of what happens in advertising happens outside of awareness. Joel, since I introduced you second, I'll allow you to go first. What comes to mind when you hear most of what happens in advertising happens outside of awareness?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that most of what happens with human beings altogether happens outside of awareness. So why would advertising be any different? And what makes it unique, perhaps, and more interesting to advertising is what's important is what grabs our attention. And what triggers our associative networks, what triggers the associations that you want people to have if you're doing advertising. And that all occurs unconsciously. Our associative networks, we don't know what they are. We don't know offhand what our associations are. So I guess my quick answer, and I've warned you before, I'm an academic. It takes me half an hour to say hello. And John shamed me, by the way, into making a shorter introduction. My original introduction was, I think, about 20 pages long.
I would still be reading it. Yeah.
Joel, if it makes you feel any better, I actually, having suggested a 50-word maximum, so I had to summarize. I had to reduce mine too.
Yeah, well, 50 words to say hello. But anyway, the short answer is everything is mostly unconscious. Even the things we think are conscious, like us having a conversation, has a very powerful unconscious component to it. Like, where do the words come from in my head?
Right. And John, I know before you jump in, having worked for you, which was a sheer pleasure, I know one of the mantras, if you will, is we think a lot less than we think, right? So when I say most of what happens in advertising happens outside of awareness, what comes to mind?
What I'm really thinking at the moment, feeling is whoever's listening to this, and thank you, whoever has got even this far, it's how are we making you feel? That's what matters. The more you feel, the more you do act and perhaps carry on listening. It's all about feeling. It's basically, I mean, Steve, you introduced it as, advertising and emotions, but it's really just human beings. It's humanity. It's psychology trying to explain humanity. And advertising, Joel, as you said, is just an extension of it, as is politics and as is everything. And in business, everyone gets very rational very quickly, because that's what you have to do when you're a serious business person and you're a big company. But it doesn't actually help beyond internal death by PowerPoint presentations and the finance director. The numbers are real. But when it comes to marketing and it comes to building massive brands, it's the same as winning an election. You've got to make people feel something.
Can I expand on that a little bit?
Sure.
So you brought something to my mind. There's research done by a guy named Robert Rosenthal that demonstrated that the first 2 minutes of a professor's first lecture, where the voice is garbled, so you can't even hear what he's saying or she's saying. So you hear and you see the person. That predicts the ultimate rating of the course. 2 minutes of garbled. Right? It's absolutely right. And he reduced it to 30 seconds. It's still predicted at a statistically significant level, but 2 minutes nailed it. So I tell my class that I'm already depressed because you've already rated my course and you don't even know me yet. And I think that relates to advertising. Something grabs you. And I think that's what you're talking about. John grabs you emotionally, grabs your attention, and it's done. And then everything else is just gloss on top of it.
Okay. So John,
my equivalent story, just to add to that, a commercial version. There was this fantastic study in the US trying to work out which doctors would be sued by patients. Okay, so this is, and because of privacy, they had to garble, like your example. They had to actually garble, so you couldn't actually hear the content. You could only actually hear, if you like, the intonation. Right. And how long they spoke to each patient. What was, well, I'm not sure if it's I was about to say delightful. What was fascinating to me, and these things stick in my brain, was it wasn't the best doctors that were not sued. In fact, almost the opposite. So the doctors that had a lovely humanity and a bedside manner, and they spoke for longer and they were warmer. It's not black and white, but they were the ones that were not as good doctors, and they are the ones that should have been sued. The ones a bit like that series, I'm trying to remember what it was, with the cantankerous, short, sharp kind of diagnostician. They were the ones that got sued, even though actually they were really good. Anyway.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I want to move on to emotional triggers in advertising, and specifically about three in particular, and why I'll get your guys' thoughts on why these three, nostalgia, fear, and joy, are particularly powerful when it comes to those emotional triggers in advertising. And either one of you can start.
I can jump to it. First of all, again, I'm going to say it's not just true of advertising. It's true of any human interaction, is whatever's going to grab us, whatever's going to attract our attention, is going to have the most powerful effect. And most of the time, those are emotions, because we focus on our emotions. And then it depends on what the relevant associations are. So what gets triggered? So when you're talking about nostalgia is I'm remembering all the good stuff that happened in my life. I'm feeling wistful about it. Now you've triggered a whole set of positive associations. I'm going to connect it to the brand, to the ad. I'm a happy camper. Fear is a whole different ballgame. We're built to pay more attention to scary things than positive things. Because back in the day when our ancestors were living on the African savanna during the Pleistocene era, if you missed danger, you became leopard lunch. If you missed a fruit tree, you got hungry. So we're going to pay attention to negativity. We're going to pay attention to fear. So if you show something that frightens somebody, they will remember it. They will notice it, because we're built to do that. Joy, that's self-explanatory. We like to be happy. So why wouldn't we go someplace that makes us happy? But that's why we look at a car crash more than we'll look at the beautiful colors of leaves, because the car triggers the danger aspect in us. And if I got too academic, stop me, because I'm about studies. I'm not going to do that.
No, John, talk from your perspective about emotional triggers.
Joel's spot on. If you simplify it, and you can measure this through galvanic skin response, which is very simple, but basically it's anything that generates a intense reaction. You don't actually know if it's positive or negative. It's just an intense reaction, but that can be fear or joy. But the thing about negatives, and that is interesting when it comes to politics and obviously advertising as well, negative political advertising. The thing about fear is it does seem to have greater impact than its, if you like, positive opposite.
Yes.
So, for instance, if you say to staff, we're going to cut your salary by 10% versus we're going to increase your salary by 10%, exactly the same proportion. People feel anything that is negative, anything that is threatening, I think it's about 4 or 5 times more than they feel the equivalent positive.
Yeah, because survival is automatically triggered in their brains. And missing a positive leaves you hungry or unhappy, and that's not pleasant, but you're not going to die. Not knowing where the alligator lives or where there's a danger, you're not going to survive. So just in terms of evolution, we evolved to notice fearful things more, and it's just how we are. So we did something with negative ads. Everyone hates negative political ads. You ask them, they hate them. But they work, and they work because people will pay attention to them and then say they hate them, and then they work anyway.
So should advertising do more of that? Because actually this is live. I know usually these sort of chats, you bring pre-packaged sound bites, but that's interesting. They do work in political advertising. So is there a greater role for negative advertising more than is currently, and I say that because we're always promoting positive, happy, sort of joyous advertising. And I just made me think, okay.
So I think I can address that. It depends is the simple answer, but let me say how it depends. If you tell somebody, if you don't use my product, your breath will stink and no one will like you, or your feet will stink, then that fear will work. If you're doing anti-drug studies, what people will do when they're too afraid is they'll leave, because that's what you do when you're scared. You leave. So that's why all of those ads that say, this is your brain on drugs, and, I have lung cancer and there's a hole in my throat, they don't work because they turn it off. They're scared and they don't want to see it. So it depends on how you're using the fear. The fear in politics is not a direct threat to me, right? It's just politician will do bad things and I better not vote for him or her. Likewise, so if I do fear that no one will love me because my breath stinks or my teeth are brown, yeah, that'll work. And that works. That's done in advertising all the time. But if I say, if you do this, you will die, that needs to be tested because my initial reaction will be, I don't want to look at that. I'm going to leave.
Well, that's the obvious examples that come to mind are sort of charity advertising. At the moment we're in November, Movember, which is the, male prostate cancer kind of month where everyone has to grow a moustache. Steve, come on, hang on, take your hands. Yeah, look at that. You see, Steve's already there and Joel, you're doing well. Look at me. I mean, but you're supposed to grow, a moustache to support it. But it's a scary thing. But somehow they've found a clever way to talk about the scary stuff, but actually engage people. So I don't know, is it a mixture?
It's a fine line, right?
You can't scare them away because if I'm afraid, I'm going to run away. So if you terrify me, I'm leaving and I'm not going to hear your message. It has to be mild enough for me to get it. Now I'll remember it that I was scared, but what I remember is not to come back because I don't want to go where the leopard is. So it's a fine line. You would obviously know more about, both of you would know more about how that works than I do because I'm not in advertising, but there's a fine line there.
Let me throw a word out.
That's why I'm asking, because although we're supposed to know a lot, Steve, there's more to, it's these sorts of conversations that provoke a new thought.
It's an interesting thought, John, to build upon you and not to put words in your mouth, but I can see the wheels turning going, I know you're not going to propose, all brands should start doing negative advertising. No, but you can't hide from the fact that they do work in the political world. Could they work? Operative word in just general advertising.
I know.
Yeah, I think they absolutely can. Why do we brush our teeth? Why do we use deodorant? We were made to feel that we're going to smell bad, and therefore we have to wear deodorant, and therefore we have to brush our teeth, and therefore we have to use mouthwash. Those are all negatively based. Nobody says, boy, did your breath smell great. You should continue to use this mouthwash. They say that if you don't use the mouthwash, people are going to do this. Oh, yeah, we're auditory. You can't see me waving my arm, but people are going to avoid you. That's what works for mouthwash.
That's probably the reason that I just don't see anybody. No one's...
Whole other story. That's for part 2. I want to move on. So I want to talk about emotional resonance in brand loyalty specifically, and how brands can build long-term connections with their consumers by tapping into those not only emotions, but shared values, personal experiences. And specifically, John, I'm going to start with you, the role of familiarity. And I remember System1 has done a lot of research about the role of familiarity. And when a company introduces a new product, if there's some sense of familiarity, it's more widely accepted, correct?
Yeah, correct. And the classic adage, familiarity breeds contempt, which is usually talked about in a relationship context. Mm-hmm. What we have found from the data is familiarity breeds contentment. Mm-hmm. It does, because this is System 1, System 2. Steve, I'm not advertising. I'm talking about the actual, Daniel Kahneman. Okay. Yep. So System 1, which is basically your heart and gut, your instant emotional, reaction to things. And System 2, the rational, clever, brainiac part. System 1 is literally, I think it's 10 million times more. We have more capability of doing it than System 2. I mean, that's, what you said at the beginning. We think much less than we think we think. We love the idea of being wonderfully thoughtful and clever, but actually we make decisions instinctively, intuitively, and then we post-rationalize. So that's a long intro to answering your question about why familiarity. Because familiarity basically is a shortcut. So anything that is a mental shortcut where, I know that, it's familiar, 80% familiar, 20% new. I mean, I still need a little bit of novelty, to create some excitement and get the chemicals, firing, but not too much. I just need stuff that I know and is familiar. That's why nostalgia, which Joel, you were talking about, that's why nostalgia works. It's just memory. It's muscle memory, and it's easy. I don't have to think. Don't make me think. Remind me. Make me feel.
A little too technical, but when you're processing something consciously, what you're calling System 2, you can only really do one thing at a time. It's a lot of work. It eats up a lot of energy. When you're processing things unconsciously, you can do many, many things at the same time. It's less effortful. It uses up less energy. So that's one reason that we would prefer it. The second reason is that the easier something is to process, the quicker you can process it, and the happier you'll be. So familiarity means you can process it more easily. And we then I wouldn't say confuse, but we associate the ease of processing with liking it. We all prefer things that are easier to do than hard to do. With the caveat, John, that you pointed out, we want a little bit of difference in there. We don't prefer the same thing all the time. So you got to have that. And the second thing I would add to that is that what associative network, it's not simply it has to be familiar. It has to connect with, it has to grab onto an associative network that's pleasant for you. And that's where the nostalgia comes in. So now you've hooked on with your product to some kind of associative network that you think well of, that's familiar, that you know how to process, that has what technically is called fluency, which means really ease of processing. And now you're a happy camper. You don't have to work. It's happening on its own. It's an associative network that you like and are familiar with. Why wouldn't you be happier now? You're going to be. And if the product is associated with that, you're going to want to go get it so you can trigger that associative network again.
Which is why when brands change their packaging too radically, like Tropicana did,
yes,
it's like, where's Tropicana?
Yep.
And
are they idiots? Didn't they learn from the Coca-Cola experience?
Apparently not.
Well, as my friend, Joel, on what you just said, my friend Mark Earls said brilliantly, thinking is to humans what swimming is to cats. We can do it if we really have to. We can do anything to avoid it.
I love it.
Interesting you say that. There's a process, John Barge is the expert on this at Yale, called automaticity. If you do something over and over again, you eventually do it automatically and don't have to think about it. And we prefer that because it frees up our thinking to solve problems and to deal with issues. So automaticity is great. And we prefer that things happen automatically, and liking happens automatically for the most part. By the way, these things can be measured. We act as though you can't measure people's associative networks. You can.
You can.
And you can measure how strong the associations are. You can. Not to blow my own horn, but what the hell, I'll do it anyway. I know how to
give you go for it.
Yes. Well, they're measurable. And it strikes me as odd that most advertisers just ask people, do you like it? Will you buy it? Instead of saying what's being triggered by this ad? What's being triggered by this product, and how strongly? And by the way, is it what you want to be triggered by the ad or the product? It might be something other than what you want, or a mixture, and it's measurable. And approach avoidance is measurable. So you'll know, do I want to get closer to this? Do I want to move further away? All of these things are measurable, and they're all, as you pointed out, John, unconscious, so you can't measure it by asking people.
Well, okay. All right. Steve, we're going to have our first heated debate now.
I love it.
I think you can measure it. So everything we humans know, we know by association.
Right.
So if you can ask people, like psychologists do, where they play the association game in a therapy session. I say mother, you say, I say, you say. Yep.
Yes.
It's very revealing. So another friend, Paul Marsden, Dr. Paul Marsden, like you, Joel, academic, was fascinated by could we create a way of asking this in an not automated, but online way. And it ended up as the mind reader, which I think we've now used 800 million responses or something. Not that matters, because it's
more than all that.
It's 800 million data points of uselessness. So, and it's just an association machine. What three things come to mind when you think of Steve Olenski? And then what do you associate with that? What do you associate with that? And how do you feel about it? It's all good, Steve. Don't worry. Don't look so worried.
Yeah. So where's the debate? I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. I know. I tried to rate a debate.
You teased us, John. I was waiting for a debate. Come on.
Well, let me pretend there's a debate here. Because you're asking people and they're consciously giving you the associations,
right?
The assumption is that it's conscious. But I would ask you, where did these associations come from? And people have no idea. So if I say night and you say day, and I ask you, why'd you say day? You go, well, day is the opposite of night. Okay. Is that what went through your mind? No. It just popped into your head.
No, when you said night, my association is King Arthur.
There you go. Night. Yeah. So, but by mapping that associative network, I can learn about you by continuing to do that. And without getting technical, by presenting a word in some kind of conflictual way, like I say, I want you to tell me what color this word is, but don't read the word. If the word resonates in your head, it's going to take you longer because you can't do the color until you've read the word. And if the word is irrelevant to you, you can do the color very easily. And we're talking milliseconds, but it's measurable. And now I'm measuring an associative network totally outside of awareness. You're measuring the associative network by counting on the unconscious sense of them by looking at how they hook together. But we're doing something similar. We're just coming at it. We're triangulating to get to the same place, or maybe even to complementary places.
But to bring it, Steve, I realize this is marketing we're supposed to be talking about. It strikes me, I've been conscious, packaging example I, talked about before, Tropicana. Thing about packaging, I went to Museum of Marketing in London. It's actually fascinating. They have all the Coca-Cola bottles and designs and other brands. And the thing is, you don't notice the ones that worked. It is literally a kind of almost background evolution, and it's not dramatic. That's the first example. The second, though, is innovation from a big brand that which has to have that, if you like, 20% novelty, that we were just talking about. So it has to have enough novelty to be interesting. Right. But when it comes to advertising, it feels to me like the dial is turned up again. So it's almost like packaging, don't notice it at all. That's good, but it evolves. Innovation, new products, you have to notice it, but it has to be familiar. With advertising, it seems, I don't know, but it seems like the dial is turned up again. And I'm not sure why those three things, if that's true.
I can measure, for the sake of argument, these differences in packaging that are consciously not noticed by presenting them too quickly for your conscious mind to recognize what happened, but your brain is still processing it. Then I'll present something neutral to you and say, hey, you like this? How much? And so on, getting into the details. And it will be affected by what you just saw before, even though you don't know that. And then I can actually measure which ones are you more likely to approach? So although the people won't notice it in the sense of telling you, they do notice it in terms of processing it. And you're totally right. A little bit of novelty is attractive because we are curious animals. And if we weren't, we'd just sit in a hole all day and live the life of a spider or something. So we have to go out there. And so whether it's
what have you got against spiders? I mean, my fear, we talked about fears and phobias earlier, is snakes, because that's human. We've evolved. But is yours spiders?
No, I picked because one of the things I study is anxiety, and therefore I've had a tarantula for the last 10 years in order to generate anxiety in people.
Well, you have a tarantula at home.
Well, she just passed away, but her name was Fuzzy. We called her Fuzzy. We did a treatment, and we saw how close people were willing to come to Fuzzy who were spider fearful. We didn't use actual phobics because we didn't want people, jumping out a window.
Yeah, don't use my daughter. Literally, she calls me from her flat to ask me to come round and remove a spider.
Well, she didn't like Fuzzy. Fuzzy's about the size of my fist. So,
oh my God. So okay, I got to rein us back in here, boys.
Well done, Steve. Well done.
Shocking. As much as I love to keep talking about spiders and snakes. Question for both of you. And this has to appear in front of a group of people, and they want to start a whole new brand in a whole new category. So there's no familiarity. They have nothing to lean on. What do? How do you advise them to launch a brand new brand in a brand new category?
Well, I'm not a marketer, so please take what I'm saying with a grain of salt.
Emotional, Joel. How do you tap into that? Yeah.
I would ask them, what associations do you want this to trigger in your customer?
Okay.
And you have to design your marketing strategy based on the associative network that you want to activate. I'll give you a funny example. I was brought in as a consultant for a new type. This is many years ago, so I'm not revealing the confidence. A new type of tampon or whatever they're technically called. And so I asked this question, and they said, well, I think we want sexy. And I went, a sexy tampon? I'm not sure that's going to work. That's not the right. As you can imagine, the room was filled with men, and everyone knows that sexy sells. I went and I said to my wife, they want sexy. And she said, was it all men? So whatever the product is, you want it to generate the associations that you want, but you also want to make sure it does not generate the associations that you don't want. Exactly. And so then I get the creative people like you guys to design something, and then I would test it. But I would start with the associative networks, and then I would move on to whether it has a gut level positive approach kind of a reaction from people in the way I just described. And then you just test it, because you never know till it's out there for sure, but you can increase your odds.
Well, that's where System1 comes in when we're testing it. But John,
so Steve, I would add, to link the conversation. Previously, I know you thought we were going off on a tangent, but familiarity, and to Joel's point, associative networks. The creative task is to make this whole new category be perceived as more familiar than it is. Mm-hmm. So Uber, mm-hmm. which, by the way, originated in St. Petersburg, Russia, in the financial crisis, when people used to stick out their hand like hitchhiking and negotiate a price with a random stranger going in the same direction. Uber is basically getting into a stranger's car. It just happens to have been brilliantly presented as if it's a taxi, as if it's a cab. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of its success. So the more new the category, the more creativity is required to make it feel and be perceived as more familiar than it really is. And
the innovation would be, you don't have to hail it, it'll come to you. So you've got a cab that you don't have to search for. And we don't have to say how successful that is. And I don't know if you've been to New York City, but the yellow cabs are dying, and everybody just takes an Uber, because the Uber will meet you where you are. And
it's pretty much the same in London with the black cabs, apart from the fact that the black cabs can use the bus lanes. So it's interesting, in central London, there's an advantage to the black cabs. But the reality of all brand purchase, whether it's supermarkets or travel, is people, all of us, if you use the category at all, choose from 4 or 5 alternatives. We don't just choose one. It's not just Uber or just black cabs or underground.
Lyft.
Right. You know, and basically they all do a job, and it's associative. We kind of instinctively know which one we're going to use when.
Yeah. All right. So as we approach the end of part 1, and I'm already going to say to everybody listening, there will be a part 2. Again, and I mean that as a compliment, because there's so many things I want to talk to these guys about. But I want to end on a top.
Steve, we have to see how many people have even got to the 38-minute mark. Okay,
exactly.
You know, I'm loving the conversation, but I don't know if anyone else is.
For the 5 of you still listening, how's that? Right, and they're all family. They're John's daughter, my girlfriend. Yeah, we know it's Joel's wife. Yeah, okay. For the 5 family members listening, I want to end this version, or this edition, if you will, with 2 things that I think they sound diametrically opposed to one another, but they're not. And you both have a very vested interest in them. And it's AI and emotion, right? Talk about right side, left side brain, right? But AI is everywhere, as everybody knows. But I want to hear both of your guys, your thoughts on how AI and emotions in advertising can play together in the sandbox, if you will. And Joel, you can start.
Well, I happen to be obsessed with AI lately, and I talk to it like it's a concrete imbecile, a patient of mine, which I don't think of that way.
And Joel, can I just ask, do you talk to it and get a verbal response?
No. It's all written. I type stuff in. But I ask it.
I only ask that because Sylvie, she talks to it. And last night I was listening. They were having a conversation. And you know what? It was like, that is the way to go. But anyway, John, sorry.
So I talk to it by writing, which is comfortable for me. So I'll say in terms of emotional range, it doesn't have it. And I'm emphasizing yet. What it knows are associations based on its database. It knows what's out there most frequently. It shows a lot of bias still because it's just looking at frequency of information rather than accuracy of information. So I would say it does not get emotion. And I have transcripts of me trying to talk to it about emotion. It doesn't get it yet. But I'm focusing on yet. I don't know what it'll be 2-3 years down the road. God willing, 10 years down the road, I don't know. But right now, no. What there is you have to enter the right data to it. So I think it's just looking generally what's out there instead of understanding how affect actually works. We're talking about affect as separate from just information, from rationality, but that's all it has so far. So it's not ready yet. If you want to use it as a tool to generate information, nothing is better. It saves hours, if not weeks. But if you want to ask it, like, talk to me about anger, it's just going to look at what people said about anger and start generating answers that way. And it's not going to be right, at least not yet. And I'm emphasizing yet.
Right. John, I know you've done a lot of work in this topic as well from AI. Talk to us about that.
Yes. Well, the more I have done in it, the less I know I know. Okay. So let me start with that as the caveat. And like Joel, I've gone down the rabbit hole. I mean, it's fascinating, but I know it's not marketing relevant. But last night, what Sylvie was doing was an art project.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And this is relevant to your question about creativity. It was, I can't even remember how it started, but this is all verbal because Joel, like you, I mean, I just assumed I had to write and I get a written response. Sylvie is just speaking to it. And getting a spoken response, literally, instantly. And it was so much more powerful, almost, the instantness of it. But it was a project about creating a bit of art about words make worlds and the world makes words. Okay. So, how language evolves and trying to create a visual or a story around that thought. And I have to say, it was amazing. It was literally, if you imagine a world where the continents created out of words, I mean, the elements. So it rains letters depending on where you are in the world. And the oceans, as they are fluid and tidal, and they mix the languages.
Okay.
And then the ice caps are solid. So these are the solid associations that haven't changed for a long time. It was really quite something. I'm not quite sure, if that's a film or if it's a one visual expression or an animation. I was laughing, going.
So now juxtapose that, John, over what you've been working on though when it comes to AI and advertising and marketing. What are you seeing? What do you find? Yeah.
So, using, Sora I think it's still in beta, but you can generate an advert, or a music video or a film, which is seriously impressive as long as you know how to work with AI. It's a creative partnership. It takes two to tango. That's the magic of it. It's not a Google.
It has to learn how you ask. Yeah, I agree. It has to learn how you think. As I interact with it, it gets better and better at responding to me. At first, it responds to me in a very infantile, idiotic way, and then I have to explain to it what's going on. And I would say you have to look it over, and maybe you're ahead of where I am. When it produces something like that, better check it out, because there can be some basic idiocy or error in it. It's very biased. I could, if we had time, I could talk about implicit bias, but AI is biased implicitly. It's absolutely biased.
So John, real fast, and I remember this because I was working with System1 and you tested ads, right, that were created by AI versus non, right?
Yep.
Share those results.
Well, for ITV.
Yeah.
And we created two fictitious brands, AI generated. One was for perfume, and one was for whiskey. They were good. I mean, really. And I think the reality is none of us know quite how this is going to go.
Yeah.
And we just have to jump in, lean in and learn, because sometimes it blows you away. And Joel, as you said, sometimes it's utter shite. Sorry, Steve. Have I just ruined your, sort of?
It needs people like you,
I never
John.
use that language. Yeah.
The programmers don't think the way you might think as a creative person. So what you get initially is this kind of concrete, literal type of answer. Yeah. And they should hire someone like you to teach it nuance of language and associations, because otherwise you have to teach it to that. Right now, it's basically a programmer that thinks faster than a programmer until you teach it more.
But I have had enough moments, not always, but I've had enough moments where literally I'm jumping around the kitchen going, this is amazing. To know that the
gentlemen,
is,
I am going to bring this to a close.
Steve, well done for reining us in.
This has been
inviting me. Thank you.
Oh my God. And I know, and I'm not just lip service, there will be a part 2. This has been the fastest 45 minutes or so. And I know the listeners, all 5 of them, maybe 7 by now, or maybe it's down to 3 at this point. Well, maybe it's a good cure for insomnia. What do you think? Listening to our voices, whatever. But no, seriously, guys, thank you so much for your time, your expertise, your passion, which John knows me very well. There's nothing I love more than passion. And Joel, having met you now, you have a passion for what you do, equal to what John does, equal to what I do. I'll give you guys 30 seconds. Give me a final word. Joel, go first.
My final word is it enriches me to hear these outside kind of points of view. I'm in the silo of academia, and now I'm learning about creativity and marketing. And I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I learned a great deal today, and it's going to change a lot of how I think about things. So thank you.
John? My turn.
It is. And remember, I said 30 seconds. All right. Thanks, John.
Steve, I loved it. Joel, it was great. And hopefully we will get to talk for hours, but no one else has to listen to it. And
okay.
Steve, thanks for setting it up, really.
Oh, I know you guys are going to have conversations offline as well. There's no doubt. When I met, real fast for everybody listening, not to bore you to tears, but when I met Joel, within 30 seconds, I go, John Kearon, and I got to introduce them. And then I thought, get them on a show, even though I'm a glutton for punishment. I love John to death. And as I'm meeting Joel, the respect is growing rapidly. And those two guys are going to do a lot of things together offline. So thank you both for joining.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the CMO Whisperer Show. I hope you shared this episode with your friends. And if you have not already, please subscribe to be kept up to date on all the latest episodes. And if you're so inclined, leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you.